Welcome to Rex's Bible Minute, a weekly video where we talk about Jesus, Christianity, and anything along those lines. We are in week 10 of our study of 1 John. We are coming to the end of it. We are on the last chapter, chapter 5. We're going to get through verse 12 today, and then next week we'll finish it, and then the week after that we'll start 2 John. So we are going to be going through kind of the summary of the letter a little bit today. That's kind of what John does. But as always, it was written by the Apostle John at the end of his life, and the end of the first century, from Ephesus to a group of Christians who are very much struggling to not allow their culture to seep into their faith and distort it and change it into something that's not actually Christianity at all. And so John wrote 1 John as kind of like a sermon to be passed around amongst all the other churches. 2 John, 3 John, more specific, more intentional, more direct intent. This one was just meant to be passed around kind of like a sermon rather than a letter. And last week he kind of like went to topic A, right? We remember John's writing style is very repetitive. It's A with a little bit of topic B, A plus B with a little bit of topic C. Last week, topic A is almost always love with John's writing. And last week was all about that. He got back to the beginning point, right? This week, it's A and B with a little bit of topic C, and it's kind of like it's almost like too repetitive. Just being straightforward, it seems like it's too repetitive. We're going to talk about that in a second, but first, as always, let's just read it. Let's just read it as it's thought, as an entire piece of thought, and then we'll break it down and try to see what it means. All right, so it starts in verse 1 where it says, "Everyone who believes that the Messiah is Jesus has been fathered by God. Everyone who loves the parent loves the child as well. That is how we know that we love the children of God, because we love God and do what he commands." This is what loving God means. It means keeping his commandments. His commandments, what's more, are no trouble, because everything that is fathered by God conquers the world. This is the victory that conquers the world, our faith. Who is the one who conquers the world? Surely the one who believes that Jesus is God's Son. It was he who came by means of water and blood, Jesus the Messiah, not by water only, but by the water and the blood. The Spirit is the one who bears witness, because the Spirit is the truth. There are three that bear witness, you see, the Spirit, the water, and the blood, and these three agree together. If we have received human witness, God's witness is greater. This is the witness of God, the testimony he has borne to his Son. All those who believe in the Son of God have the witness in themselves, but anyone who does not believe in God has made a liar of him, because they have not believed in the witness which God bore concerning his Son. This is the witness. God has given us the life of the age to come, and this is in his Son. Anyone who has the Son has the life. Anyone who does not have the Son of God does not have the life. Now, at first glance, this seems like, didn't we read this in chapter 1 and chapter 3? And didn't we already read basically the same thing? And on one hand, yeah, because John's writing style is very much a but he also, it's like, you got to pay attention to it though, because there's subtle differences. I used to watch the show The Walking Dead. It's not very Christian recommended. I don't recommend it as a Christian you watch it, especially if you're new to the faith. But I watched it all the time. And the thing about that show is, and the reason I stopped watching it is, if you've seen the first 3 seasons, you've pretty much seen all of it. Not to hate on anybody who loves that show, but it really is the same repetitive thing over and over. They struggle to survive. They find a place. Something happens that makes the place unsafe. They have to fight to leave. They struggle between, do I do the good thing and survive, or do I do the bad thing and survive? They're just this same repetitiveness. And that's why I stopped watching it. We can kind of take that attitude towards John's writing here, because the things he's talking about are fantastic and amazing and life-changing, but if he says it over and over and it's so condensed and dense, and it's like you can almost become numb to it. And it's important, especially in this section, that we pay closer attention. We wake up hey, oh, this is different. This is something that we haven't seen before. And that starts in verse 4. Verse 4, we see something very different. The rest of it sounds very similar, and Verse 4 and the next few sections can sound a lot like everything we've already read, but verse 4 is really, it's new. Tom Wright calls this a new dimension. Like John just brings out new dimensions of the same topics he's been talking about. And so in verse 4, John says, because everything that is fathered by God, which is nothing new, right? That we've talked a lot about, that we are the children of God. That's what that is. You're fathered by God. You are God's children. Because everything that is fathered by God conquers the world. This is the victory that conquers the world, our faith. So John starts talking about conquering the world. What does that mean? And he says it in past tense, like it's already done and that we're continuing to do it. Well, there's nobody conquered the world. Like nobody in human history has ever conquered the whole world. What is he talking about here? Well, in order to understand it, we kind of need to jump to the other place where John talks about this, and his line of thinking can kind of be exposed. And that's a good thing about John, is he wrote a lot. And so we can read his gospel, we can read the other two epistles, we can read Revelation. For this, he talks about this kind of thinking in his gospel, in the Gospel of John, which, I mean, in my opinion, just kind of the way I read it, I think 1 John is just a really condensed version of the gospel, without the narrative part. Like, it's all the theology part minus the narrative part, so minus the story aspect, if that makes sense. That's kind of the way I understand it. And so in John 12:31, Jesus says, "Now comes the judgment of this world. Now this world's ruler is going to be thrown out." What does that mean, right? We're talking about the same kind of idea here, that the world and conquering the world and the ruler of the world, who's in the throne of the world. Jesus is talking about the context of his death, right? This is the context of now's the time when the throne is going to change hands. In John 14:30, Jesus says, "I haven't got much more to say to you. The ruler of the world is coming, and he has nothing to do with me." In this case, talking about the devil, Satan, because that current age, Satan ruled the world. And we're not going to get into eschatology and all that, like end time stuff, right now, because it's just not the time or place for it. But basically, Satan has been given the reins of the world, and God uses what he does for his ultimate glory, for his good. That's all the more I'm going to say about that. If you're curious about that, reach out. I'd love to have that conversation. But again, John 14:30 says, the ruler of the world's coming. He has nothing to do with me. I have nothing to do with that guy. And that's in the context of him leaving, after his death and resurrection. He goes to God's realm, to heaven. John 16:33, he says, "I've said these things to you so that you can have peace in me." This is Jesus talking. "You'll have trouble in the world, but cheer up, I have defeated the world." Right? So this is Jesus saying, like, I've conquered the world. Like he talks about it here. And all of these things are building up to chapters 18 and 19 of the Gospel of John, which is where Jesus gets arrested, his trials, his tortures, and ultimately his death. And it's like, if you look at the interactions between him and Pilate, Pilate is talking about, the world and kingdoms and conquering. And Jesus is basically telling him, like, this is how I do it. Like, it looks like I'm losing. It looks like I'm being conquered. It looks like I'm game over. But Jesus' death is how he conquers the world. The thing that should ultimately show that you are conquered, it's how he conquers the world. He uses the things that are used to conquer people to conquer, which is crazy. That's what Jesus is talking about here, is that those who are his brothers, sisters, his children, like, I need to explain that a little better. And this is kind of going off script a little bit. But what is done for Jesus is done for us. Like, if we're going to hierarchy this thing, like, Jesus is like our older brother. He's our king, right? But he's kind of like our older brother, and we are co-heirs with him to God. That means whatever is coming to him is coming to us, in a sense, okay? This is really big, 1,000-yard view of this topic, all right? Again, this is something that needs, like, multiple studies on its own. But basically, what Jesus is saying is that Jesus has conquered the world, and therefore we have conquered the world with him. The ruler of the world, the devil, the enemy, the Satan, the opposition to God is 100% done. Like, he can't take it back. And then in John 19:34, we'll kind of go on this little tangent really quick. it mentions this. It says, instead, one of the soldiers thrust a spear into Jesus' side, and blood and water came out. This is a parallel to what we're seeing in First John and these verses where it talks about the blood and the water. They testify that Jesus really did come in the flesh. This is kind of like John's attack on a Gnostic, specifically a Docetic heresy. So, like, if you remember, the Docetists, they believe that Jesus didn't actually come in the flesh, or that if he was here. He was actually the Christ from his baptism to his death, but he didn't actually die. Like, before and after that, there wasn't actually the Christ. Like, that was the only time that he really was the Christ. And so this is another one of those, like, those Platonic ideas seeping into Christianity and twisting it into something that's not Christianity at all. The Greek gods, especially the demigods, they didn't have blood. They had what they called ichor or ichor, however you want to say it, and it looked like water. And so the accounts that water came out when Jesus was stabbed to see if it was dead. Well, the Docetists would say, see, he wasn't really human. The blood was from the human, but the Christ part, that was where the water came from. That was ichor. Like, and John is just saying, no, those two together testify that he really was man, that he really was here, that he really was flesh, and that he really did die. Because that's the means that he conquered the world. And so John continues on, and he basically says that the world is not just a source of temptation, as Tom Wright puts it, but it's a power source in a sense. It's a power source for evil. And Jesus, the Creator, has come along and said, this is mine, I'm taking it, deal with it. And evil says, no, I'm going to fight to take it back, even though it has no weapons anymore. It has nothing it can do to take it back, but it's going to fight back. And that's what all those verses in the Gospel of John that we read, the context of those is talking about when you get persecuted, when the world attacks you. Well, it's because of me, because they're trying to take my throne back. I've already conquered them. They're just fighting a guerrilla war that they're ultimately going to lose. When Jesus returns again the second time, he just, with a word, boom, it's done. No more, right? And that gets us to verses 11 and 12, where I love how Tom Wright says in his commentary here, so there's no point trying to reword this. There's no point trying to summarize it. John says it best himself. He says in verse 11, this is the witness. God has given us the life of the age to come, and this life is in his Son. Anyone who has the Son has life, and anyone who does not have the Son of God does not have life. You got to remember the Jewish worldview we talked about at the very beginning of this study 10 weeks ago. That the Jewish worldview was that they lived in the present evil age, right? The age of death, the age that things were not as God wants them to be, right? Satan rules that age. The devil rules it because it's broken. It's not what God wants it to be. They lived in the expectation that the Messiah would usher in God's new golden age, where God's people would rule forever, that God's Messiah would rule forever, that everything would be made right. The difference is when Jesus ushered in that new golden age, the age of the life to come, it coexists with the current evil age. Now, when Jesus returns, no more evil age, right? That's done with. But that new age, that age to come, has already busted in. It's already starting. And those of us who follow Jesus, those of us who are co-heirs with Christ, we're already partaking in it. We've already got it. Yes, we still have to experience that physical death, but we don't experience true death. We experience life, and that's it. And so that brings us to the last section of 1 John. So we're going to finish up the book next week. I'm really excited about it. I mean, it's always exciting when we finish one of these studies because, the consistency of it is just very refreshing and encouraging. Like, look at what we've done so far. If you have any questions, as always, reach out. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.